Today, I'd like to talk about the story of Abraham in chapter 21 of the book of Genesis. And we start out this story with some very excellent good news. If you remember, Abraham and Sarah are older, and God has promised them a child. And as a matter of fact, God promised Abraham that he would have as many descendants as there were stars up in the sky and grains of sand at the seashore. So Abraham has been waiting and waiting, and now he's older. He's just about 100 years old, and he's like, God, when are you going to fulfill this promise? But in chapter 21, God does fulfill the promise. And Sarah is so happy. Abraham is happy. They have a beautiful baby boy named Isaac. And Isaac, very interestingly, in Hebrew means laughter. And Sarah is like, so overjoyed, and she says, well, really, she had laughed when she thought she might be pregnant. Abraham had laughed earlier in the story because they thought this was not going to happen. So very appropriate, they named their child Laughter. In a way, Sarah says, maybe people are going to make fun of me. I'm older now, I'm having a child, so the child's name, Isaac Laughter, is perfectly appropriate, wonderful for this child. And Abraham shows his faithfulness here to God's promise, because when Isaac is 8 days old, he is circumcised. And just as God had requested that every boy, when they're 8 days old, be circumcised, so Isaac is circumcised when he's 8 days old, which shows Abraham's really faithfulness to keeping the promise. At this time, Abraham is 100 years old, so he is older. And again, the accuracy of those years, we're not really that certain in terms of the actual years of Abraham. Maybe he was a little bit younger. Their calculation of those ages in the book of Genesis is not always that precise, not always that accurate. And Abraham shows his joy at this occasion by having a great feast for Isaac and for his family when he is weaned. So no longer feeding at the breast. This is a big time to celebrate. It's kind of the child has survived those early illnesses that could happen when the child is young, just first born. Many times children, died in that first year or two. So the fact that now he has survived and he's doing well, he's thriving. Abraham says, we got to celebrate this. So he has a great feast. And Sarah then notices as Isaac is growing that Isaac and Ishmael, the son of Agar, who through Abraham and Agar having intercourse, they have the son Ishmael, because Sarah thought she might not be able to get pregnant. So Ishmael is there, and he's playing with Isaac, and Sarah gets a little bit upset at that. She kind of gets jealous, why is Isaac spending time with Ishmael? I mean, Ishmael is Agar's son, and, she kind of didn't like it, so she went to Abraham and said, Abraham, I don't like this situation. Please, get rid of Hagar, get rid of Ishmael. Let's just focus on Isaac now. We don't need Ishmael any longer. Enough is enough. Abraham, though, was rather upset because Ishmael is his son. He loves Ishmael. He kind of doesn't know what to do. So he talks to God and he prays to God and says, God, this is a dilemma I'm in here. What do you think I should do? So in his prayer, God says, don't worry. Do what Sarah says. You've got to keep Sarah happy here. Do what she says. Things will work out okay. I'll take care of the situation. Don't worry about it. Things will be fine. The promise will go through Isaac, but Ishmael I'll take care of as well. And great nations will come from him. He will be a great warrior. Don't worry about it. So Abraham feels kind of good about that after he's discussed his situation in prayer with God. And so he, the next day, gives some water and some bread to Agar and says, Agar, you have to leave now. So Agar leaves, goes to the wilderness, uh, and she's there in the wilderness and kind of a deserted area. And she's very upset, very confused. And unfortunately, she runs out of that water, and there's Ishmael there, and she's like, what am I going to do now? And she's kind of despairing, and Ishmael starts to cry. But God hears the cry of Ishmael. God sends an angel to Agar and says, Agar, don't worry. I'm going to take care of you and Ishmael. God's going to work this situation out. Don't be upset. God has heard your cry. And so God will take care of you. And Agar looks up and she sees a well for water. And she goes and she fills the skin that Abraham had given her for the water, fills that with water. And she feels better about the situation, that things are going to work out okay for her. And God really shows his love for both Abraham and Agar in that situation. And Ishmael grows up and he becomes an expert bowman. And Agar finds a wife for him in Egypt. Now, at the end of chapter 21, we see Abraham with Abimelech again, whom we had seen earlier. And they have a conversation together and they're talking. And Abraham brings up something that's kind of difficult for him to talk to Abimelech about. He says, Abimelech, there's a situation here with a well. I've had this well here, and I dug this well, and some of your men are really taking this well over, and this isn't really a just thing, because it's my well. I dug the well, and you really shouldn't be doing this. So Abimelech talks to his men and figures the situation out. And Abraham then gives Abimelech 7 ewe lambs, so that Abimelech will acknowledge that Abraham has dug the well. And that well is at Beersheba, and Beersheba means the well of the 7. So Abraham gives him that offering, and Abimelech also gives an offering to Abraham. Abimelech left, then returns to the land of the Philistines. And Abraham, in thanksgiving to God, planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba there at the well. He invoked God as he did that. And Abraham also resided in the land of the Philistines. So Abraham, at this time, is at peace with Abimelech and all his surrounding families, and things seem to be going well for him. And what are some of the things that we learn from this experience in chapter 21 with Abraham and with Sarah and Ishmael and Hagar and Abimelech? First of all, we learn, and it's very important, that God fulfills his promise. And it's funny, it's not always on our time. We have our ways, we have our time, we want to know exactly, when God will fulfill it. And it seems like God is really taking too much time here. Certainly Abraham and Sarah would have liked a child earlier, but it's God's time. But God fulfills his promise. We also learn that Abraham fulfills his part of the promise. God had asked Abraham that each male child would be circumcised when they were 8 days old. And Abraham fulfills that. He's faithful to that, and he does what he should in terms of listening to God and responding to what God has asked him to do. We also see the importance here of the name of Isaac and the connection with laughter. A lot of times we have this sense of humor in the Bible. It's not all serious. It's like that sense of reality. And having a child when you're so much older, it seems impossible. It seems normal that you would laugh. And so the child's name becomes laughter. We also see the importance of the feast. When Isaac is weaned, Abraham acknowledges that it's an important moment, and he acknowledges that moment by having this special feast for his son and his family gathering together. Another lesson that we see, a very important lesson, is the problem with jealousy. We see Sarah here as jealous of Ishmael, jealous kind of Agar too. And what can happen with jealousy? God works certainly in this situation, but we have to be careful with this sense of jealousy and more accepting of other people and the gifts that other people bring to us, because this situation could have ended very badly, but God intervened in the situation. We also see God's response and the care of God in this situation, and the way God protects Ishmael. God helps Agar in this very difficult circumstance. God is there for them, and God leads them to the well. And another very important teaching we see here in chapter 21 is the importance of wells. Wells were so vital for the people because, again, the source of water. Without the water, they have nothing. They can't irrigate their crops. They can't survive. So in this areas where there were a lot of deserts and a lot of wilderness, the wells were very important, and the water source is very important. Even today in Israel, there's a lot of fighting over the wells, and the importance of having a good, clean source of water, and how God protects and how God provides in this situation. So Abraham, father in faith, continues to be faithful. And as we know, Father Abraham has many friends. Many friends has Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Keep on praising the Lord.